today, I am not a data scientist, right? Like, so let's, this will probably be a little less technical than some of the discussions that you normally participate in, but I wanted to provide sort of from the business side, the way that we use data science products, right? Like to drive value in the business. And so feel free at any point to stop, ask any questions that you have. Again, I would rather this be more of a dialogue than just me standing here talking at you, but I do have some slides I would love to share with you that sort of explain like PPL, what our particular team does, what my job is, the way we've leveraged a tool called CallVault from our data science team to get insights. We're kind of at the beginning of that journey, and I'll get into that a little later. And then we'll talk about sort of like future use cases and where we plan to go. So hopefully you all enjoy this. 1 second. Right. So again, as was said in the bio, I've been at PPL for 3 years now. I started in July 2021. My background is in actuarial science, is what I went to school for undergrad, and I have a grad degree in applied statistics. I did some supply chain and forecasting work for another company local to Philadelphia prior to my time at PPL. The customer service analytics team is currently 6 analysts, right? We have 2 senior data analysts, 3 data analysts, and 1 intermediate data analyst. And they serve the internal customers within PPL, right? Like, so as you can imagine, as part of the customer services org or PPL just larger, like there's billing questions, there's finance questions, there's operational questions, the contact center and metering, how are we performing? If we go to have an activity out in the field, are our field people meeting their SLAs, right? Their service level agreements and the various things as set by the PUC and some of our other stakeholders. The team currently uses a lot of SQL and Python. PPL has started migration to cloud services. So some of you progress in your career, if you're able to get exposure to AWS or Microsoft Azure or any of those things, it can be nothing but beneficial, because that seems like where a lot of this is going as we move from like on-prem sort of data storage and data processing to a more of a cloud-based future.
Nice.
Does anyone have any questions about the team or day-to-day? And I'm sorry, I should have shared this. So the team's day-to-day consists of 2 things, right? Like of multiple things. So it can be as low level as, hey, we want to provide, we need to email every customer that received a bill last night, and we need that particular contact information, up into like we're doing forecasting for the metering operations people. So the team is not data scientists. They do employ a lot of data scientist techniques, right? Data techniques. They are very skilled. They probably live somewhere in between, like operational business folks and the data scientist team, and we're relied upon for a lot of different things. I should have explained that earlier. Does anyone have any questions now?
Right. Any general question from the audience?
No. Okay.
Rodman, I have a question. So when you say
Sure,
data,
please.
From academia side, we assume that we can get any data from the grid, but it's not true, right? Typically, there's a band limit, there's a preference, there's maybe what is the focus to collect money and be fair. So can you tell us, when you say data, what types of data do you have for your team?
Yeah, so our team has access to, and just due to our roles, is probably we have access to more data than probably other users in the company, right? Like maybe not the data scientists, because they're working on models for various folks, but it could be financial data, it could be metering data, right? Like it could be demographic data, it could be external sources of data from third-party partners such as Experian. Some of the data, as you will see, where our limitation was with this particular project, was around the audio transcripts, right? Like so. It's some of it's structured, some of it's unstructured, right? Like a lot of the data that our team works on is is in like SQL databases or Hive tables or, like Parquet files or something along those lines. The other piece from an academic, I will say from my own, like undergrad work and graduate work is, you will always get very clean data sets when you're doing work, and the data will be nothing but clean and right. Like, so you spend a lot of time, like preparing the data, explaining the data, understanding the nuances of what's going on, right? So if I could give one recommendation to people here, and I think Ben Spanswick has come and spoken to this group before, and Ben is great at this, right? Like, so Ben is a data scientist who is great at the very technical pieces of data scientists and the new tech, but he is also very much focused on the actual business application of what he's doing, right, and what it means to the business. And so, I think that people on my team and the people I spoke to, and one of the things that has made me successful in my career is, right, we can do all these great things, right, but like what does it boil down to in the bottom line is ultimately what executives and other folks care about. I hope that answers your question.
Right. Yes, that mostly answered my question. So how about the data quality? For example, when you look into the billing data, how often they are wrong or how often they are mislabeled?
Sure. So no, that's a great question. So there are, and you'll see here. Let me go here and I'll come back to this, right? Like, so there are four main ways for the customer services group, right, that we have customer interactions, and I use these today because this is kind of like what we're talking, the problem we were trying to solve at the time, or we're still continuing to solve, right? And so you get an agent interaction, right? You call in and you speak to an agent. You can use the IVR. We're all familiar with that. You use automated services, web analytics. So we have a website and you can monitor how people use those things and you save transactions. And then we also have like SMS and some other things that are sort of smaller, that we use too. But to go back to your data quality purposes, right? Like, so some of our data is very, very good, right? Like it is, you can go into the billing table and you're able to see the transactions that happen. You're able to see how they occurred. You can answer a lot of questions. We do not have all the data we need, right? But like, you can make some very good inferences to solve whatever problem you're doing by the quality of data we have. If I had to say one of the places where the data quality is lacking, it's sort of in our web data, right? And so we've recently done a team has done a project where we've kind of like started that. We are working to improve the quality of the web data, but there's another group who is now using Google Analytics and they're doing some tracking through there. So hopefully the quality of that is better. But one of the issues is that certain like tokens and things would get repurposed on the web side, right? Like, so you see like activity and it looks like 50,000 people do it a month, and then it goes to 3. And you see this other activity that no one did, and it goes to 50,000, right? Because people are not, some of the operational people, their focus is not on data, their focus is not on reporting, it is not on data quality. So they're making decisions that just serve them in the moment, right? But it has these other implications. So to your point, some of the data is very good and it's structured, it's very easy to use. I'm sure that a lot of people here could get in, write a SQL query and get some data out and make sense of it. Some other data, it is not as structured and as nice to use as you would like. Part of that though too, and just to give you some other insight, is that remember, like we're a large utility and we have all this historical data, and no one at the time of when these tools, like not the more modern tools, but like when some of these databases were structured and the schemas were created, we're thinking of using the data in the way that we're using it today, right? So some of that is that, no one just at the time of creation. So it's not like you'd like, oh, if I just had this one thing, it would be perfect. And you have to like write code to infer that one thing at the end, right? Versus it being part of your original data set.
Right. Excellent. Thank you.
No problem. No. So yeah, so these are the sort of the 3 main ways we get data. And one of the problem the problem that we were experiencing is sort of a threefold problem that I have two of the problems up here, and there's an additional piece, right? So we had some consultants come in, and the consultants come in, they do some analysis, they tell you can save a bunch of money. And one of the ways that we could save money, and this is true, right, is this: if it's cheaper for someone to self-serve in the IVR or via text versus speaking to a live agent, right? Agents are, they're great at what they do, but it's a labor intensive resource. We have both in-house and we use a third party. So you can imagine, right? Like if we could lower costs, it's the benefit to the company. Also, we have some outside consulting that also comes in and gives us like insight into our customer satisfaction, which is a very important part of being in business. And one of the things that they bring up is that the more digital services you offer, the higher your customer satisfaction is, right? So if we can sort of lower our phone call usage to the agents and improve our digital usage, right? Like we get to save money, we increase customer satisfaction. And then there's also the third part. I'm sorry, and I have two ones here, I apologize. But the third part is that I always get questions like, hey, what are customers calling about? and that has been a very tricky question until the data science team stepped in with a solution, and we'll talk a little bit more about that solution in a moment. Any questions?
Yeah. You mean when you get the phone calls, the management level higher than you want to know the big picture, like what are they tackling towards for the general people that are giving maybe hundreds of calls per day? Is that
yes
the difficult? Okay. And
or like, so that is true as well, right? But like we could be running a campaign, right? Like or there could be an issue, right? Like, so let's say in a hypothetical situation, we send out the wrong communication to the wrong group of customers. And so management wants to then know, like, how many of those customers who receive the incorrect communication are contacting us back, right? So in the past, right, like people would listen to calls, and if the average call is 8 minutes long, then someone can listen to 7 calls in an hour, and but they're not doing their day job as well, right? And then so we get about 6,000 to 10,000 calls a day, depending on the time of year and that seasonality. So someone, it used to infuriate me in the past. Like my boss would go, "Hey, I was listening to calls yesterday." And he listened to 30 calls, and he's like making business decisions off of 30 calls. And I'm like, Chris, we had 9,000 calls yesterday. Like your 30 is not representative of the 9,000, right? Like it's not a great process to, like sort of manage the business.
So when you say you have a data analytics team to do this 9,000 core, I don't know, statistical analysis, what does that mean? That means you transcribe it into numbers, and then with the number you draw charts, and with the charts you try to summarize statistical maybe moments. Is that what you mean?
So I think that in the past, right, we were very good at, we could give you the metrics around the call, right? So we're very good at saying like, hey, the average handle time, and that's the total call interaction, took like 521 seconds, right? Very good at that. We're very good at, like, the team, my team, even outside of like sort of the data that is prepared, has written some custom tables. They give us a lot of insight into the things that we want to know as the business, right? But like, they're great. Like, hey, we made service level on 80% of the calls, right? Or like we had this many collections calls come in, this many billing calls come in, this many these calls. But we were not great at knowing like the context of the calls, right? Like, so again, the way the workflow works is you call into the IVR, you make some sort of utterance, and then that machine learning algorithm, the large language model, NLP, whatever we want to call it, then makes a determination by the words, right, to send you down a path, because you were trying to do an activity that we could not handle with our IVR.
Right.
right? And so we had no way of knowing if how really, given the topics that the customers were talking about, how well was that particular uh, how was the IVR routing calls? Is that appropriate, right? Is it off? Are there utterances that we're missing, right? So again, while we were very good at the metrics around the call, we could tell you who had this many calls, here's the expected handle time, here's all these other metrics around the call.
Right.
We were not very good at like knowing what our customers were asking on the phone, making sure that we could service them to the best of our abilities. And just to give you an idea, right? Like, so there are two visualizations up here. This was through the one on the left is sort of our IVR self-serve statistics, right? Like, so you can go through and you can see that, we had 1.5 million people, and that's not the full IVR use case, right? But like we had 1.5 million people get to where we think the start of a swim lane begins, and 1.3 million of those were able to successfully complete a self-service interaction. Now, there's 200,000 people in there that were not, right? So they got routed over to the agents. And now we know where they went. We can measure those calls, but we didn't have any real insight into the context of the conversation. To one, we could refine the IVR to now better manage those calls and hopefully improve that number. But then two, are we missing some things fundamentally in our operational processes that allow us to like better serve the customers, right? Lowering costs, as we said before, and increasing that customer satisfaction.
Right.
And
So
these are just, yes, please.
So for the data you have, you mentioned IVR in the
Yep.
active voice response. And there are also, agents who really talk as a real human to the customers. So do you get both data for your analytics, or you only use the IVR as the source?
So we get both data pieces for
Both.
our group has access to both, right? Like, so we are able to go in and we've done some analysis in the past, and maybe we could at some future date like sort of walk through that. But some analysis in the past of like, hey, where are people failing out in the IVR? What are some of those problems, right? Like, what are some of those problems? And one of the things we found, we were able to discover like some bugs in the IVR as a result, right? Like, so one of the things that an analyst was able to find, and no one would, is that customers would get to a certain place in the IVR, and if you called in from a number that we did not recognize, but you were able to authenticate in some other manner, right? It would ask you, do you want to save your new number to your account so that next time it recognizes this number? And no matter how you answered, it would send you to an agent, and it shouldn't, right?
Okay.
So
Exactly.
so that was where, and just to put some numbers around it, right? Like, so think about this, is that if, and I'm just making up a number here, but if the average agent interaction costs us $10, right? $10 interaction, and that, I remember that was 2,900 of those happened in a month, right? We're talking about $30,000 almost, right? Like, so there's those little things that like sort of add up, that like we're using data and analytics and other things to solve, that other people probably aren't looking into.
Right. I want to make a comments to the maybe academia researcher over here. So today, so far, we talk about the data quality. We also talk about a realistic setup and challenges. So this is critical. For example, when you do a model, right, you typically has assumptions on the data availability and the data quality. So today, Rodman gave us some nice background, what we can assume and what we can say. And second, yeah, for these like customer service statistics, maybe IVR conversion by natural language model or ChatGPT type of new services, that's also where you can do more research, right? Where it is needed and how to maybe convert it into the research question you have for your new inferences or journal paper or conference paper. So Rodman, thank you. It's valuable for us.
No problem. And yeah, and again, so again, like just as like, while we can answer a question about the paths and give metrics, right, we have very little insight into what customers are doing. And again, the more customers we are able to self-serve in the IVR, the lower our phone costs, and we can direct those resources to other places they will help, right? Like our agent support A bunch of other activities that happen though too, just because they're knowledge and skill that, like some of those could be done if we had more bandwidth from the phones. So I just included this. This was a part of another presentation we did. And the highlighted box, though, I think is the part that maybe your group recognizes the most, right? Like, so, but, like just the talk is that, like we use a phone system, Twilio and Calabrio. There's a million phone systems, not as important. And we would get these audio transcripts. And in a real world scenario, right? Like we would get these audio transcripts. We did not get transcriptions, so we couldn't do any like data mining on them, right? They're just audio. So a real person would have to listen to a call. And there's two groups sort of in PPL that would do that, right? Like, so I want to say like every customer services manager will probably listen to a few calls and we get together and talk about it. But there's also a phone quality team, a team of 4 or 5 people. They will listen to some other calls and they score the agents and make sure we're meeting our compliance targets and all those kind of things. One is that was purely random, right? Like the way they were selecting calls prior to the call vault tool was a purely random process. So we're probably missing, right? As you said, 8 minutes a call, 8 calls an hour, 6 people. All of you can do the math, and we're not even scratching the surface of like our weekly call volume, right? Like to actually really know what's going on. So we had some vendors in, and just to give some other background, we had some vendors come in, and we actually started some projects to get call transcriptions through Microsoft and various others. And it sort of never worked out. We would get to a certain point. Ben Spanswick's team, Ben said, "Hey, Rodman, I think we could do this," right? He's like, I think we could do this. We could do it for lower cost. So one of the senior data scientists on his team came in. We sort of like figured out a way to get the calls transcribed, and then they sort of used an LLM. It's in-house, it's trained, we're not passing data to like outside sources. So, like they did all the training and all that. And now we are currently transcribing, I want to say like 80% of our calls are being transcribed like in a manner daily, right? Now we still have not gotten to our future state where we're able to process all those calls and do those things. We're at the beginning of that particular journey, but November was sort of the first month this thing went live. We were able to go in. And process some calls, and we were able to give back some feedback to sort of leadership about what's going on. Prior to November, right, we were doing this. The model has been completed, and it was probably 75% ready to go since probably late summer. And the way we started off, and just to prove that this worked, and you'll see some of the data from that, was that we have certain callers who call us 3 or more times a month, right? And one of the questions, I'm in meetings with the executives. I'm like, who's calling their utility company 3 times a month? No one is doing that. So again, we gave some data over to Ben's team. They were able to run it through the model, and we were able to get some insights as to like why these particular customers were calling us 3 or more times a month. And so it's been a great relationship. Again, data scientists are really smart people creating great products, though, but they're really driving value ultimately to the business, and that's what that's what everyone wants.
Right. Do you mind if I raise a question?
Please ask away.
Right. For here, I mean, for now, you have some tools, maybe natural transcription, and then you do data analytics. In the future, maybe you use more of a famous large language model. But I wonder, is your company trying to do it on the open source version, which is free, just more labor from your team, or you are willing to pay some companies who will take over the, I don't know, large language model input and output for you?
So I think we explored, and Ben, I saw, just jumped on, so he may be able to answer this question, right? He's a little closer to that than I am. Right. I think in the past we explored some outside companies doing the particular work for us, passing it in. But ultimately, I don't know where we will wind up in the future, right? But like
Right.
again, to the point I was making before, Ben and his team are super talented, and we're able to do an in-house solution that is far less cost than, you know, if we did this with Microsoft or some other outside source. Ben,
Right.
I don't know if you had anything you wanted to share about that part.
Yeah, I can try, man. I apologize. I'm driving, so hopefully you can hear me okay. But yeah, it's a constant build versus buy discussion, right? That we have, and at the end of the day, there's so many use cases for generative AI, large language models, et cetera, that
Right.
if we went out to a third party and purchased every single one of them, we'd run out of money really quickly, right? So if there's a viable use case for us to handle it in house, then we certainly want to take that opportunity. But despite being a risk averse industry, utilities in general, right? We're certainly welcome to third parties.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
And so here is the, you know, like there's a lot of data processing going on in the background. Again, they use a large language model, and now what we're getting though is sort of like a few different components that are insanely useful, right? Like to the team as we manage the team. So the model goes through and it transcribes every call. And this is high level. Again, I'm not a data scientist, so I can't talk to you about hyperparameters and tuning and all those particular things. But it's giving us the sentiment of the call from -1 being negative to +1 being positive for each call. So we're able to get that. It's also giving us a call summary. It's redacting information, like sensitive information out. So if someone shares their social security number or something along those lines, it's taking it out so that other users can score the so other users can use the tool. I apologize. It's also giving us a call topic distribution, right? Like, so the model is going through and now doing some analysis saying like, hey, based on, you know, like our training models and whatever, here's what these calls were about really, right? Like not, and that may not, does not always align with the way the IVR was, you know, like sort of categorizing these calls too. So we're sort of at the very beginning of that particular journey. But the thing is though, right, is like we finally have these transcripts to get the insights into the customers. So one of the things we noticed, I spoke about that, those customers that call us a bunch, right? So we have customers, you know, like there's a key performance indicator and it says like 91% of our people call us like one time a month, right? These 9% of people call us 2 or more times and so forth and so on. But we had like customers that were calling us like 21 times in a month, right? Like, so
Yeah.
think like we're only open 20 days a month and someone called every day. And one of the
Right.
things that came out of that was that those particular calls, and I can share like, yeah, so you can see this was sort of what we're doing. People were calling about payments and terminations, right? Like so these are our most distressed customers. They are calling because they made a payment and they want to make sure that their service isn't getting cut off, or they're calling because they can't make a payment to see if there's any programs or assistance. Right, like, and so a lot of these calls were about collections and billing calls. Now prior to this, you know, we could make some inference like, hey, the collections queue is getting most of these calls, but collections calls are typically for to make payments, right? We have billing calls where people are making inquiries and some other things. So this was at the highest level, and again, we're still we're working to automate this particular part. We're working with someone else on Ben's team to automate this particular part to get some additional insights, right? Like to sort of, you know, just give us some other tools and other things that will allow us to manage the business. But again, we were not able in the past to even give any real insight other than those sort of hard metrics about the call, right? If we go down another level, so you can see that the top you know, payment plan, payment arrangement, terminator, overdue balance, you know, service termination, power shutoff due, power outage due, past due, right? Like, so now we're able to get into the insight and even dissect those things a little farther by sort of customer topic is what the team is working on now, so that we are now able to go back and refine the IVR, right? Go back and sort of talk to our partners in the collection. Hey, what can we do to not cut off customers because we're seeing this a surge in, right, like the customer collections time, customer collections and service, avoiding service terminations, some other things. And this is all not possible without like, like data science techniques, some of the things you're talking about with academia working and pioneering these things, right? Large computing power, all these things, which is, which has been really good.
So many PhD students are doing research on applying semi-supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and because they are limited label in power engineering. So for here, are you getting the label because they are pressing the keys on the cell phone, or you actually learning it from the natural language conversation? You extract the label out of it. So which one is it?
So we are actually learning this from out of the summaries, right? Taking this out from the summaries of the models, right? So yeah, okay. So we're working on revising sort of call topics and some other things going forward. But yeah, again, we are processing these particular audio transcripts. And so these are all from the agent interactions. These are not from the IVR labels, right? Like, so these are the topics that the customers are actually discussing. I was able to actually take this into our VP, Lisa Norden, and we were able to talk about like what, and mind you, this is something that like people intuitively had some sense of, but we never had 100% validation that this is what is occurring for this particular group of customers. And it was like really powerful, right? You can see one of the things that, like a happy inference that came out of this was that you could see the third line of standard offer program, right? So that is a pricing program that is offered in PA. But we were able to say like, hey, agents are actually talking about this on these particular calls as a way for our customers to save money, right? Like, so not only is it about that, right? Like then that ties back to training and development and some other things, and right, like in doing the right things for the PUC. So again, getting access to this tool and this type of data has been really helpful for a customer services organization.
How much confidence do you have on these, I don't know, computer learned label? Because this is what the computer tells you, right? They say, oh, based on the voice, based on the conversation, I guess this is PowerShot of do. Maybe the computer is right, but how confident you are? 100%, 95 or 90?
So we're currently like working with Sean to do that, right? But like we're pulling out like sort of phrases and that to make sure that, like, and we're checking them all. And so I don't have an exact confidence like level of it all. I will say that we have seen some anomalies, right? Like, but by and large, it has been relatively consistent and trustworthy. And I would also say the other way is that we had nothing before, right? Like, so even if we're 70% confident, right, or 65, right, it's much better than, it's much better than no insight into it in prior. And we're going to continue to refine this as well. So like we're talking about this, and this is some of the analysis that like our team did, but we're like we're now, Sean is working with our QA team to get scoring for every call based on some criteria, right? Like, so we're trying to devise a way that, like we can have, they will still have to do their due diligence, and the human QA scoring will be better, right? But like we'll now have a way to score every call. So like we could compare our internal agents to our external agents as far as like, like on one criteria. He's also working with the training team so that they can get insights out of here to further refine our training methodology and those things going forward. Right. Like, so there's a bunch of uses, not just, like the operational, there are a bunch of like operational and money saving things as well. But I feel like every week or every month, we've also like learned something new, like, oh, hey, we didn't think about it. We could use it this way. One of the, and this was just done by one of the data science team is currently working with Ashley and Sean on a tool, just, like, so we can search for words throughout all of the particular through the data set, so that we can also like get context, right? So one of the things is here, we talked about standard offer program. You can put it in here now, and we can get like the context of how it's being used. So yes, they did mention it, but like, what is the context of the way it's being used? And we could see that it was being offered to to our customers who were having trouble paying their bills.
All right, nice, thank you.
No problem. That was sort of all I had for today. I wonder if anyone has any questions or comments.
Yeah, that's very informative. I wonder from the audience, do you have any question for Rodman? I do have more, but I want. So Dominic says, what are next steps for your work? For example, I guess you said you just turn into this new work from November. And can you give us a plan, like within 5 years, within 1 year? How is your plan structured?
Yeah, no. So we have some operational goals, right? Like to lower our O&M budget. So those are some hard targets. There's also some goals working around training to get sort of PUC complaints and the quality assurance and all those things to raise those particular numbers and our customer satisfaction. Not related to this tool, but the data science team, Ben's team, is also working with us to get sort of an agent assist tool that will allow them to extract information from a database to better help themselves to serve the customers. So those are some things working on. As far as from a data science perspective, there's a few customer segmentation pieces that are going on that are related to customer services and working cross-functionally with them. Our team is like largely answering a bunch of business problems and assisting others operate like every day. So those are kind of like the sort of like large pillars that are on the horizon for us. The other three is being those that pertain more to a data science framework.
Thank you, Rodman.
No
Dominic, if you have more questions, please feel free to chat again. So the next question is coming from Kate Sexton. The question is, hello, what program does the model used in your presentation to capture the data? I guess maybe he's asking what program you have right now. I know it's customer service, but is there any rough description of in your company? Yeah, what is the structure that is going all the way to customer service to you, and what program that has a potential use?
So I want to say for that particular phone data, again, we use a vendor, Twilio and Calabrio, and they are our phone vendor, right? We are storing. So the way this works is, like customer interactions happen, they're stored in the cloud, right? And then at the end of the day, there's some processing done where then that data is made available to us in a Parquet file form, right? And then audio files are stored somewhere else, and I go to the tool to listen to audio files, so I'm not sure like where those hard files are saved. But like Ben and team, we're using Azure. They are grabbing those particular audio transcriptions, running them through some model to get text transcriptions, which are then being saved in a Hive table somewhere, and they're doing all their particular processing. So long story short, a lot of Azure, maybe some Python. There's on-prem, there's some SQL stuff that we're using. Our team still uses a little bit of SAS. It's like a little leftover. We're probably migrating away from that in 2025. There are still a few on-prem databases as well, like Oracle and some others.
Right. I think you answer in an excellent way. Kate says, thank you. Any other question from the audience, feel free to put it into the chat box. So Rodman, at the beginning, we talk about the data availability and quality. I want to ask you, will your team get the voltage data, like the power quality data, the topology data? I know it's more towards physical part, not maybe to the customer billing and services, but do you get those data analytics out of your group?
Yeah, so we do have access to that data. I will say that, so we're able to do some processing. Most of our interaction voltage data is for customer services probably around usage, right? Like, so Ben's team and some others have done a lot more work around like interval data and doing some of the processing, the power quality. But most of our data that we would use that for is around billing. But we do have access, and someone on the team could go in and pull that if they needed to.
Okay. The next question is, you talk about a large amount of data, like 9,000 cores per day. Do you know the computational burden? I know your IT department must be very powerful, but have you ever faced any trouble? They are too slow to do, I don't know, the translation or transcribing into the, I don't know, data format you want.
No, again, I'm not as familiar with that part. I know that we were standing up additional workers and right, like in Azure to do the processing for the calls. Because I think when we first started, again, to your point, like it was a lot more data than we had originally anticipated computationally, right? Like, and then we also, Ben's team in IT has been very good about having that data available the next morning, right? Like, so we've had to stand up some additional resources like in the cloud for that processing.
Right.
Yeah, I'll add a quick note to that. Processing power, obviously, right, with cloud is not really a huge issue, right? It's quite scalable. Just add a few more GPUs to make sure that we get the processing time down to the realm which we need. The question always does become, though, is price. And again, the competitive advantage of this solution is the fact that it's cheaper, significantly cheaper than elsewhere, right? So keeping those costs in check. Sometimes, that might require advanced sampling methods, right, to maybe not process and transcribe all calls, just as an example. Right now, we are able to do all of them, and the machine learning engineering team has really done a great job at optimizing the code, right? But these are just sort of the business constraints that you work within. But fortunately, the cloud has enabled significant scalability.
Right. And do you mind if I ask you how many GPUs do you have in your company for this type of job? For example, in Arizona State, we have 300 GPU to power all the students, teachers, professors' needs. So for utility like PPL, how big is the computational resources with respect to GPU?
I mean, it's whatever clusters we decide to spin up and power, right? Obviously we don't own any of that hardware for this job specifically. I do not remember. I want to say it's 3 GPU clusters, but again, don't quote me on that one. I have to go back to the MLE team to diagnose that exactly.
That's very nice.
Hey, Wang, can you hear me? This is Paul.
Yep.
Yeah, so I can comment on that. Yeah, I can comment on that a little further. So when we talk about, this is a question really regarding the IT infrastructure and when we talk about the computational issue. So if usually from an IT perspective, we will look at it from two different angles. Whether you're talking about on-prem versus cloud. So from on-prem, and also this digs a little deeper from the utility, financial, and investment perspective. On-prem and cloud also represent capitalization and O&M. So, for example, a lot of the cloud costs on a lot of utility company is part of operating expense, which you cannot capitalize. Operating dollar is always less than the capitalization dollar, right? So, for example, so from a capitalization perspective, and sometimes on-prem, even though sometimes people talk about on-prem solution to being obsolete, in some of the cases, for example, some of the recent study we look at, on-prem could be still more valuable, providing that this is a capital dollar, and also you can use it to a buffet style versus a la carte style on the cloud, right? And also on the cloud, when we say we can get whatever GPU or computation power we have, it may or may not be true. For example, if we want to secure a H100 GPU for NVIDIA H100, right? For example, I want to have 20 clusters for my Gen AI stuff. Microsoft may not have the availability for it, right? Even though we have let's say we budget for it, right? So comparing to paying maybe $3 to $5 million over 5 years costs from the cloud, perhaps I can spend $1 million on H200 GPU. I can purchase a GPU with as many cores as I could, with 200 terabyte additional memory for storage, and for an on-prem solution, working with my IT team and spend $1 million on that. So this is something, again, this is purely from a utility perspective, from the finance and investment perspective, and from the IT perspective. How do we approach the problem and how many people are using it? But again, consider some of the project very similar to Ben's team. Our team, from a data science perspective, also work on image and generative AI computer vision items. So GPU become a valuable asset from a computation perspective. And that becomes a big challenge from the investment, and how do we persuade the senior and executive management to pursue these types of solutions working with different IT team. So I can give another example. For example, by installing the cable equipment for a server, it could cost $100,000, right? So we have the budget for it. So things like that. So again, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I hope this answers your question. Overall, it's not like we just buy a server, everybody use it, or we just procure a cloud space. This involves much more on the budgeting, investment, and how the senior management wants to approach it, right? Or they could ask the same question: if you want to spend $1 million on the this type of budget, why don't we find a vendor and do the project with them? We pay the same money, and then they will guarantee the work, right? So there are a lot of things that we may or may not anticipate. We have to try to answer from the investment and multi-year planning perspective. Hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Bochen. It does. And lastly, I want to ask Rodman, Ben, so in your company, you are doing this data analytics, and maybe there's a consideration of cloud computing. There may be a third party who get this data from you and do some data analytics. So what is your privacy in I don't know, how do you secure the privacy part when you do analysis and when you engage with external service provider? Is there any procedure or is there any insights you want to share?
So I know from the few things that I've been involved with, right? Like people have to go through the whole like IT governance process, right? Like, and be approved as a third party vendor. So we do that like with Experian, right? Like, so they provide us with some demographic and credit-ish data. And right, we pass them some information. So that's like probably my primary experience with it. But like it's all got to go through the IT governance process and be approved, and and they do checks on to make sure their security and some other things are up to par. Ben, you may have some other insight.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's going to be case dependent, right? Whether or not we're receiving information from a third party, or if we're sharing with a third party for some engagement, right? Whether it's IEEE, whether it's universities, whatever it may be, right? So there are set governance rules, and as usual, utilities tend to be very cagey with their information, but it's certainly things that we have done in the past. And again, when it comes to generative AI models, this is kind of a little sidebar. We are very sensitive that we're not training, quote unquote, you're here to the executive saying, does this go outside our firewall, right? And that's obviously not really how it works technically, but right. The mentality stands, right? And we don't want any of our data leaking to or being trained on, open source models, being ingested into open source models, et cetera. And I think that's true for most companies. But yeah, we've very quickly had to stand up a lot of governance processes surrounding our data, et cetera. But I think we're well positioned to be able to be flexible within those frameworks.
Excellent. And there's another question from Dominic. And the question to Rodman is, does your NLP handle non-English customer calls?
So I am not sure about the model capabilities, if that's possible. But our current IVR does not, right? Like, so it is one of the limitations of our current IVR, and we're working to sort of get the newer iteration, hopefully in 2025. But yeah, if you call in, you're speaking to you're speaking another language, you're then transferred, or the call is conferenced with the translator service that we have, right? Like, so again, we talked about all these things and how ultimately it boils back down to the financials, right? Like if we were able to employ a model or something that would allow us to save costs instead of using the translator service, that would be welcome, right? So, yeah, I hope that answers the question.